Welcome back, guys. Before we start the video, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Date: July 23rd, 1968. The forest near the DMZ never sleeps. Imagine walking through the forest at 3 o'clock in the morning, knowing that every shadow around you could be hiding an enemy soldier. You can't sleep either. But what Sergeant Thorn and his men saw that night was not an enemy fighter. It was something that shouldn't have been there. And before this story ends, you'll learn why some soldiers never talk about what they saw in Vietnam. The air was so humid it felt like a wet cloth pressing down on you. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, the air in Quang Binh province was so thick you could almost drink it. Sergeant Thorn raised his fist into the air, and the 5 men behind him immediately got down low. Silence. A sharp silence broken only by the distant sound of big guns firing from somewhere in the south. A sound that kept reminding you the war was never over. Thorn had been in the country for 18 months, long enough to know the difference between a monkey moving through the trees and a human trying to stay hidden, long enough to trust his gut feelings. And right now, every gut feeling he had was screaming that something was wrong. "Hail!" he whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "You hear that?" Private Orion Hale moved forward, holding his M16 rifle tight against his chest. At 19 years old, he'd been in Vietnam for exactly 43 days. 43 days of learning that his training back home meant nothing when you were actually here, when the jungle itself seemed to want you dead. "Hear what, Sarge?" Hale asked. "Exactly. Nothing." Hale listened. Thorn was right. The jungle had gone completely silent. No insects, no night birds, not even the constant buzzing of mosquitoes that usually drove them crazy. Just nothing. Lieutenant Callum Reyes moved up beside Thorn, his face barely visible in the darkness. "How long has it been quiet?" "Maybe 2 minutes, Thorn said. "Started right after we crossed that stream." Reyes pulled out his map, using a red-filtered flashlight to check where they were. They were 3 kilometers north of the DMZ, deep in territory that belonged to nobody during the day and belonged to the enemy at night. Their mission was simple: patrol, watch, and report. Avoid fighting if possible. But avoiding a fight meant knowing what you were trying to avoid. "We should move," Reyes said, folding the map. "Something's got the animals scared, and I don't want to be here when—" The smell hit them all at once. Not the usual smell of the jungle, that mixture of rot and plants and mud they'd all gotten used to. This was different, strange, like copper mixed with something old, something that had been underground for too long. "Jesus," one of the men behind them said quietly. "What the heck died?" "Quiet," Thorn hissed. He looked at the tree line ahead, searching for any sign of movement. The moon was barely a sliver tonight, and even with their eyes used to the darkness, they could only see maybe 20 meters at best. That's when they saw the light. It was faint at first, like someone had lit a candle in the jungle about 50 meters ahead. But it was moving, flickering. No, not flickering. Pulsing. A soft greenish-white glow that seemed to breathe. "Contact," Reyes whispered into his radio. "Possible enemy movement. Grid." He stopped. They all stopped, because the light wasn't alone anymore. There were 4 of them now, moving in a single line through the jungle parallel to the patrol. And as Thorn's eyes adjusted, his brain tried to make sense of what he was seeing. They looked like men. That's what his brain wanted to believe. For men walking through the jungle in the middle of the night. But men don't glow. Men aren't 7 feet tall. And men don't move through thick jungle plants without making a sound, without disturbing a single branch. "Are those?" Hale started to say, but his voice died in his throat. The creatures, because that's what they were, Thorn realized, not men, moved with an inhuman grace. Their skin caught what little moonlight there was and reflected it back. But more than that, they seemed to make their own light. That greenish glow pulsed from their bodies like the deep-sea fish Thorn had seen in a National Geographic magazine back home. But this wasn't the ocean. This was the jungle. And nothing in the jungle glowed like that. "Don't move," Thorn breathed. Nobody moves. The closest creature was maybe 30 meters away now, and in the pulsing light it created, Thorn could see details that made his mouth go dry. The skin wasn't just shiny. It was covered in scales like a reptile, but the scales were large, each one the size of a silver dollar. The creature's head was long, almost human in shape, but wrong in every way. And the way it moved, that silent, smooth motion, reminded him of how snakes move. All muscle and purpose. No weapons. That's what struck him as strange. If these were enemy soldiers, they'd be armed. But these things carried nothing. Their hands, if you could call them hands, hung at their sides. 3 fingers and what looked like claws. Hale's finger moved to his trigger. Thorn grabbed his wrist, shaking his head sharply. Not yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with. The creatures continued moving parallel to them, seemingly unaware of the 6 Americans frozen in the bushes. Thorn counted seconds in his head. 30. 45. A full minute passed as the glowing beings moved through the jungle like they owned it. Like they'd been here long before the war and would be here long after it ended. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they were gone. The glow faded into the distance, swallowed by the jungle darkness. And slowly, carefully, the normal sounds of the night began to return. A cricket, then another. The buzz of insects starting up their endless noise again. What the heck was that? One of the men finally said, his voice shaking. Reyes looked at Thorn. Did you see? I saw it, Thorn said. His hands were shaking, and he made fists to stop them. We all saw it. We need to report this, Reyes said, reaching for his radio. Report what? Thorn asked. That we just saw for what? Monsters? They'll think we're on drugs. Or worse, they'll think we've gone crazy. Hale was still staring in the direction the creatures had gone. Sarge, I've been having nightmares about the enemy every night since I got here. About getting shot or stepping on a mine or getting captured. But this... He looked at Thorn, and his eyes were wide. This is worse. Because this isn't supposed to be real. Thorn knew exactly what he meant. You could prepare for enemy soldiers. You could train for ambushes and firefights and even torture if they captured you. But how do you prepare for something that isn't supposed to exist? We keep moving, Reyes decided. We complete the patrol and we discuss this later. Back at base. Agreed. The men nodded, but Thorn could see it in their faces. They were rattled. Heck, he was rattled. In 18 months in Vietnam, he'd seen men die in ways that would give him nightmares for the rest of his life. He'd seen things done to human bodies that he couldn't unsee. But somehow this was different. This was wrong on a level that went deeper than war. They continued their patrol, moving more slowly now. Every man was super alert to any sign of that greenish glow. The jungle seemed darker somehow, more heavy and threatening. Every shadow held possible danger. Every rustle of leaves made them freeze. An hour passed, then 2. They reached their checkpoint, a small clearing on a hillside that offered a view of the valley below. The moon was starting to set, and in another few hours the sun would rise and they could get back to base. Set up around the area, Reyes ordered quietly. 2-hour shifts. Thorn, you and Hale take first watch. As the other men settled in, Thorn and Hale positioned themselves on opposite sides of the clearing. Thorn sat with his back against a tree, his M16 across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness. But his mind kept going back to those creatures. 7 feet tall, scaly skin, glowing, moving through the jungle like they belonged here more than any human ever could. He'd heard stories, of course. Every soldier had stories about strange things in the jungle. About sounds that didn't make sense and shapes that couldn't be explained. Most guys dismissed it as stress or exhaustion or the medicine messing with your head. But Thorn had always prided himself on being logical. He believed in what he could see, what he could touch, what made sense. But what he'd seen tonight made no sense at all. Sarge. Hale's whisper came from across the clearing. Yeah. You believe in hell? The question caught Thorn off guard. What? Hell. Like in the Bible. Fire and demons and all that. Thorn was quiet for a moment. I don't know, Hale. Why? Because if hell is real, Hale said softly, maybe we just saw what lives there. Maybe Vietnam is where hell touches the earth and those things. Maybe they crawled up from somewhere we're not supposed to know about. Thorn wanted to tell him he was wrong. wanted to say something comforting, something that would calm the kid down. But he couldn't, because part of him was thinking the exact same thing. The night dragged on. No sign of the creatures. No sign of enemy soldiers either. Just the endless darkness and the waiting and the fear that had nothing to do with bullets or bombs. When dawn finally started to break, painting the eastern sky with streaks of orange and red, Thorn felt a relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. Daylight meant safety. Daylight meant they could see. Daylight meant those glowing things would go back to wherever they'd come from. But as the sun rose and the jungle came alive with morning sounds, Thorn made a promise to himself. He would find out what those creatures were. Not for the army, not for the mission, but because he needed to know. He needed to understand what was sharing this jungle with them. And he needed to know if they were in danger from something far worse than the enemy soldiers. The debriefing. The meeting room at Firebase Delta smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. Thorn sat across from Captain Morrison, a man who'd been in Vietnam since 1965 and had seen enough action to earn 3 Purple Hearts and a face that looked 10 years older than his actual age. "Let me get this straight," Morrison said, lighting his 4th cigarette of the conversation. "You're telling me you saw 4, what did you call them?" "We didn't call them anything, sir," Reyes said carefully. "We're just reporting what we saw." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying the 3 men in front of him. Thorn, Reyes, and Hale had been separated and interviewed individually first. Their stories matched. That was either a good sign or a bad one, depending on how you looked at it. Glowing, 7 feet tall, reptile skin. Morrison counted off the details on his fingers. Moving silently through thick jungle. No weapons, no equipment, no sound. He took a long drag on his cigarette. "You boys been taking your malaria pills?" "Every day, sir," Thorn said. "And you haven't been trying any of the local plants? Because I've seen what some of that stuff can do to a man's head." "No, sir. We know what we saw." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder. It was thin, maybe a dozen pages. He flipped through it slowly, his face unreadable. "You're not the first," he finally said. The 3 men exchanged glances. "Sir?" Reyes asked. 3 months ago, a river patrol reported something similar. 2 boats, 8 men total. They went ashore to investigate a clearing and claimed they were chased back to their boats by creatures matching your description. Yellow skin instead of green, but otherwise, he closed the folder. Same height, same silent movement, same impossible stuff. "What happened to them?" Hale asked. "They were reassigned separately. Different units." The report was filed and forgotten. Morrison stubbed out his cigarette. "You want to know what I think? I think the jungle does things to men. I think the stress and the heat and the constant fear of dying makes you see things that aren't there. But," he paused, "but 8 men don't all imagine the same thing. And now 12 men have reported the same creatures." Thorn leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, we need to go back." "Absolutely not. Sir, if there's something out there. If there's something out there, Sergeant, it's not your concern. Your concern is the enemy. Your concern is completing your tour and going home alive." Morrison stood up. "You're dismissed, and this conversation stays in this room." "Understood." "But, sir." "That's an order, Sergeant." They left the meeting room in silence. Outside, the firebase was alive with activity. Helicopters coming and going, supply trucks being unloaded, men cleaning weapons and filling sandbags. Normal war stuff, the kind of danger you could understand and prepare for. "He's covering it up," Hale said once they were far enough away. "He's protecting himself," Reyes corrected. "If word gets out that patrols are seeing monsters in the jungle, it affects morale. It affects readiness. It makes us look crazy." Thorn said nothing. He was thinking about that folder. 3 months ago. 8 men. Different location, but same province. Same creatures. And Morrison had said the report was filed and forgotten. How many other reports were filed and forgotten? That night, Thorn couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring at the metal ceiling, listening to the snores of the other men and the distant thump of artillery fire. His mind kept replaying what he'd seen. The way those creatures moved, the glow of their skin, the complete silence of their movement through the jungle. You don't forget something like that. You can't unknow what you've seen. Around 3 a.m., he got up and walked outside. The firebase was quiet at this hour. Just a few guards on the edge and the distant glow of cigarettes in the darkness. He found Hale sitting on a pile of sandbags, his M16 across his lap, staring out at the jungle beyond the fence. "Can't sleep either?" Thorn asked, sitting down beside him. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them," Hale said, "just standing there watching, like they were deciding whether we were worth killing. They didn't seem interested in us at all. That's what scares me, Sarge. If they had attacked, I could deal with that. I know how to fight, but they just ignored us, like we were ants, like we didn't matter." He turned to look at Thorn. "What if we don't matter? What if there's something out there that's been here longer than us, and we're just stumbling around in their territory, thinking we own the place?" Thorn didn't have an answer for that. "I'm going back," he said instead. Hale stared at him. "What?" "To where we saw them. I'm going back tomorrow night." Morrison said. "I don't care what Morrison said. I need to know what they are. I need to know if they're dangerous." Thorn looked at the young soldier. "You don't have to come, but I'm going." Hale was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'm in." They weren't the only ones. When Thorn quietly mentioned his plan the next day, Reyes pulled him aside. "This is crazy," the lieutenant said. "You're disobeying a direct order." "I know. You could be court-martialed." "I know that too." Reyes studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "What time are we leaving?" The three of them, plus two others from the original patrol, Corporal Danny Price and Specialist Marcus Vega, slipped out of the firebase just after midnight. They'd told the gate guard they were doing a short-range patrol, logged out properly, made it all look official. No one questioned it. Patrols went out all the time. The jungle at night was a different world. Your vision narrowed to what was directly in front of you. Every sound became louder. Every shadow held possible death. But this time, Thorn wasn't thinking about enemy soldiers. He was thinking about those creatures and what they might find where the encounter had happened. It took them 90 minutes to reach the location. They moved slowly, carefully, using hand signals and staying in tight formation. When they reached the spot where they'd seen the creatures, Thorn called a halt. "Spread out," he whispered. "Look for anything unusual. Tracks, droppings, anything that proves they were real." They searched the area in a grid pattern, using red-filtered flashlights to avoid ruining their night vision. For 20 minutes, they found nothing. Just jungle. Just plants and mud and the normal mess of the forest floor. Then Vega whistled softly. They gathered at his position. He was kneeling beside a large tree, his flashlight pointed at the trunk. At first, Thorn didn't see what had caught his attention. Then Vega moved the light, and Thorn's breath caught in his throat. Claw marks, for parallel gouges in the bark, each one at least 3 inches deep. They started about 7 feet up the trunk and dragged down to about 5 feet, like something tall had reached up and dragged its claws down the tree. "Jesus," Price muttered. Thorn ran his fingers along the marks. They were fresh. The exposed wood was still light-colored, not darkened by air and moisture. These had been made recently, maybe even last night. "Over here," Reyes called softly. They found him 30 feet away, staring at the ground. His flashlight showed a clear impression in the mud. A footprint, but not a human footprint. This was larger, wider, with 3 clear toe marks, each ending in a point where a claw had dug into the earth. Thorn knelt beside it, pulling out a small notepad and pencil. He quickly drew the print, noting its size. 12 inches long, 8 inches wide at the widest point. The depth of the impression suggested something heavy, something that weighed a lot more than a human. "There's more," Hale said, his voice tight. They followed him to a small clearing about 50 meters from where they'd first seen the creatures. And there, in the center of the clearing, they found what looked like a camp. Not a human camp, There were no fire rings, no thrown-away equipment, no trash. But the plants had been flattened in a circular pattern, like multiple large bodies had been resting there. And the smell, that same copper and old smell they'd noticed before, but stronger here, concentrated. Like this was a place the creatures came back to regularly. Count the impressions, Thorn said. They did. 8 clear areas where something large had pressed down the plants. 8 creatures, not 4. They have a colony, Reyes said quietly. Or a tribe, or whatever you call a group of them. Thorn's mind was racing. This changed everything. If there were 8 of them, there could be dozens. Hundreds. An entire population living in the jungle, completely unknown to the outside world. We need samples, he said. Vega, get some of those plants where they were lying. Price, see if you can find any shed scales or hair or anything biological. Hale, take photographs of the footprints. They worked quickly, collecting evidence. Thorn filled a small plastic bag with dirt from inside one of the footprints. It was the only proof they had. The only thing that might convince someone back at base that this was real. That's when they heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the jungle. Low, rhythmic, almost like breathing, but deeper, more powerful. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, making it impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. Pack it up, Reyes hissed. Now. They scrambled to gather their equipment, stuffing samples into their packs. The breathing sound was getting louder, closer, and with it came that glow. Faint at first, just a hint of greenish light filtering through the trees. Move, Thorn commanded. Back to base. Stay together. No noise. They moved as quickly as they dared through the darkness, their hearts pounding. Behind them, the glow was spreading. Multiple sources now, moving through the jungle with that same eerie silence. Hale glanced back and immediately wished he hadn't. There were at least 6 of them now, their glowing bodies creating a constellation of light in the darkness. And they were following the patrol. Not running, not being aggressive, just following, like they were curious, or hurting them. Don't look back, Thorn said. Just keep moving. The creatures followed them for almost a kilometer before finally stopping. Thorn risked a glance over his shoulder and saw them standing in a line, perfectly still. Their glowing forms gradually faded as the patrol put distance between them. When they finally reached the firebase fence, all 5 men were soaked in sweat and breathing hard. The gate guard looked at them curiously but said nothing. You learn not to ask questions about what patrols see in the jungle. Back in their sleeping area, Thorn laid out their evidence on his bunk. The sketches, the photographs, the samples. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was proof that they weren't crazy, that what they'd seen was real. Now what? Hale asked. Thorn looked at the evidence for a long moment. Then he looked at his men. All of them looked shaken. All of them looked like they'd seen something that had completely changed how they viewed the world. Now, Thorn said, we find out what the heck these things are and why the army wants to keep them secret. But that investigation would have to wait. Because the next night, the creatures came to them. The wire. The attack alarm went off at 2:37 a.m., shattering the night. But not the usual mortar alarm. This was different. This was the fence breach siren, the one that meant something had gotten through the wire. Thorn was on his feet before he was fully awake, grabbing his M16 and running outside in just his pants and boots. The firebase was chaos. Men pouring out of buildings, officers shouting orders, searchlights sweeping the fence. But the searchlights weren't finding anything. No gun flashes from the tree line. No incoming fire. No explosions. Just that smell. That copper and ancient smell, now so strong it made your eyes water. North fence, someone was shouting. Something's on the north fence. Thorn ran toward the north side of the firebase, Hale and Reyes right behind him. Other soldiers were already there, weapons pointed at the wire, fingers on triggers. But nobody was firing, because what stood beyond the wire wasn't something you'd been trained to shoot at. There were 12 of them, maybe more, in the darkness beyond the searchlights. They stood in a loose half-circle just outside the wire, their glowing skin casting an eerie green light across the fence area. Up close, with the lights on them, you could see details that hadn't been visible in the jungle. Their eyes were huge, almost like an insect's, with vertical pupils that reflected the searchlights like a cat's. Their mouths were thin slits with no lips that showed rows of sharp, jagged teeth when they opened. And their hands, God, their hands were wrong. 3 fingers and a thumb, each finger ending in a curved claw that looked sharp enough to tear through steel. But it was the way they stood there that truly terrified you. Patient, calm, like they had all the time in the world. Like they knew something you didn't. Hold your fire. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the confusion. He pushed through the crowd of soldiers, his sidearm drawn but pointed at the ground. Nobody fires unless I give the order. Sir, what are those things? A young soldier asked, his voice cracking. Morrison didn't answer. He was staring at the creatures with an expression that Thorn recognized. Not surprise, not shock. More like he'd expected this. Like he'd known this was coming and had been dreading it. One of the creatures stepped forward. It was taller than the others, maybe 8 feet, with darker scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It raised one hand, not threateningly, just raised it and made a sound. It wasn't a roar or a hiss or anything you'd expect from a reptile. It was almost musical, a series of clicks and trills that somehow formed a pattern, a rhythm, almost like language. They're trying to communicate, Reyes whispered. The tall creature made the sound again, more insistent this time. Its eyes moved across the line of soldiers, seeming to study each face. When its gaze fell on Thorn, it stopped. Those massive eyes locked onto his, and Thorn felt something he hadn't felt since his first firefight. True, primal fear. But there was something else in that gaze. Recognition. Like the creature knew him. Knew he'd been in the jungle. Knew he'd found their camp. Sir, we have to do something, one of the lieutenants said. We can't just stand here. What do you suggest? Morrison asked, his voice tight. Open fire on something we don't understand? Something that hasn't shown any aggression? They breached the fence, sir. That's aggression. They walked up to the wire and stopped. That's not aggression. That's... Morrison struggled for the word. That's a message. The tall creature tilted its head, still staring at Thorn. Then it did something that made every soldier on that fence question their sanity. Pointed directly at Thorn. One clawed finger extended, unmistakable in its intent. They want you, Hale said, his voice barely audible. Thorn's mouth was dry. Yeah, I got that. Don't even think about it, Reyes said, grabbing Thorn's arm. But Thorn was already thinking about it. Because if these creatures had wanted to attack, they could have. They could have come over the wire in the darkness. Could have killed men in their sleep. Could have torn through the firebase like it was made of paper. But they hadn't. They'd announced themselves. They'd waited to be seen. This was a choice. And somehow Thorn knew that what he did next would determine whether everyone at Firebase Delta lived or died. I'm going out there, he said. Absolutely not, Morrison said immediately. Sir, with respect, they're not going to leave until they get what they want. And what they want is me. Thorn looked at the captain. I found their camp. I took samples. I disturbed their territory. This is on me. You go out there, you're dead. Maybe. But if I don't, we might all be dead. Morrison stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the creature standing beyond the wire. Patient. Waiting. He put away his sidearm with a curse. If you get yourself killed, Sergeant, I'm putting it in your file as suicide by stupidity. Yes, sir. Thorn handed his M16 to Hale. He kept his sidearm. You didn't walk into the unknown completely unarmed. But he didn't draw it. Didn't make any threatening moves. He just walked toward the gate, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Thorn, wait. Hale called. He ran up, pressing something into Thorn's hand. A small flashlight. Just in case. So we can see you. Thorn nodded, not trusting his voice. Then he walked through the gate. The distance between the gate and the wire where the creature stood was maybe 30 meters. Felt like 30 kilometers. Every step brought that smell stronger. That copper, ancient smell that made his animal brain scream at him to run. But he kept walking. He reached the wire. The tall creature was 10 feet away now, close enough that Thorn could see the pattern of its scales, could see the way its chest rose and fell with breath. It was alive, real, not a hallucination or a stress-induced illusion. This thing existed. The creature made that trilling sound again. Closer now, Thorn could hear how complex it was. The way different tones wove together. It really was language. These things could talk. Then the creature did something that would haunt Thorn for the rest of his life. Crouched down, bringing its massive head level with his, and it spoke. Not in clicks or trills. In English. You take from us. The voice was wrong. Too deep, too powerful, like it was being filtered through water. But the words were clear, understandable. Holy Christ! Someone behind Thorn whispered. Thorn's legs felt weak. I didn't know. We didn't know you could, that you were intelligent. The creature's thin mouth curled into what might have been a smile, or a threat. Hard to tell. You assume much. I'm sorry, Thorn said, and meant it. We were just trying to understand. Trying to know what you are. The creature tilted its head, studying him. We are old. Here. Before you. Here after you. You war. You destroy. You forget. This land not yours. Each word seemed to cost the creature effort. Like speaking human language was physically difficult. But the meaning was clear. These beings had been here long before the war. Maybe long before humans had ever set foot in Vietnam. And they were tired of being disturbed. The samples I took, Thorn said. You want them back? No. Keep. Remember. Remember we watch. Always watch. The creature stood up to its full height. Behind it, the other creatures began to retreat, melting back into the jungle darkness. But the tall one remained for a moment longer, its enormous eyes boring into Thorn's. You survive. Others survive. If you stay away, our place sacred, our place death for you. I understand. No, you not. But you will. Then it was gone. One moment standing there, the next just gone. Vanished into the jungle with that same eerie silence. The green glow faded. The smell went away. And the normal sounds of the night slowly, cautiously returned. Thorn stood at the wire for a long moment, not quite believing what had just happened. Behind him, he could hear the chaos of the firebase. Men shouting, officers demanding reports. The sound of boots on dirt as soldiers scrambled to make sense of what they'd witnessed. He turned and walked back through the gate. Hale was there immediately, grabbing his shoulders. Are you okay? Did it hurt you? I'm fine, Thorn said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. I'm fine. Morrison pushed through the crowd. My office. Now, all of you who were on that patrol. They sat in Morrison's office for 3 hours. Every detail was written down. Every word the creature had spoken was recorded. The captain didn't try to explain it away this time. Couldn't. Too many men had seen it. Too many had heard it speak. This goes higher, Morrison said finally. This goes way higher than me, than this firebase, than anything in Vietnam. What do we do? Reyes asked. We follow orders. We stay away from that area of the jungle. We mark it on the maps as a no-go zone. Morrison looked at each of them. And we never, ever speak about this outside this room. That's not a suggestion. That's an order that will be enforced by court-martial if necessary. But sir, Hale protested. The other men saw them. You can't cover this up. Watch me. Morrison stood up. As far as official records are concerned, we had a probe by unknown forces that retreated without fighting. That's the story. That's the only story. Thorn said nothing. He was thinking about what the creature had said. Sacred places. Places of death. Like the jungle itself was a temple. And they were the priests or the guardians or something humans didn't have words for. When they finally left Morrison's office, dawn was breaking. The firebase was returning to normal. Men were making coffee, cleaning weapons, preparing for another day of war. Like nothing had happened. Like the world hadn't just proven it was stranger and more terrifying than anyone had imagined. But Thorn knew better. He'd looked into those eyes. He'd heard that voice. And he knew that the war they were fighting, the war with the enemy soldiers, was nothing compared to what lived in those jungles. Ancient things, patient things, things that had been here for so long that human conflicts were just background noise to them. And they were watching, always watching. The question was, what would happen if humanity pushed too far? The last witness. 3 weeks after the firebase encounter, Sergeant Thorn was reassigned. No explanation, no warning. Just orders to pack his gear and report to Da Nang within 24 hours. He never saw Firebase Delta again. Hale and Reyes were reassigned to different units, different provinces. The patrol team was scattered across Vietnam like pieces of a puzzle nobody wanted to complete. And the official report of that night? Redacted, classified, buried so deep that it might as well have never existed. But Thorn couldn't bury it. You don't forget the sight of 12 creatures standing at your fence. You don't forget hearing one speak to you in broken English. You don't forget looking into eyes that held intelligence far older than anything human. His new assignment was quiet. Too quiet. They put him on supply runs between firebases and airbases, moving equipment and people. Safe work. The kind of duty they gave soldiers they wanted to keep out of trouble. Or soldiers they wanted to keep quiet. He tried asking questions. Tried finding out if there were other reports, other encounters. But every door he knocked on closed in his face. Every officer he approached suddenly had somewhere else to be. The message was clear. Shut up and forget. But forgetting wasn't an option. Especially after what happened in August. It was a routine supply run. Thorn was driving a big army truck along Route 9, accompanied by 2 other vehicles. The road was relatively secure, or as secure as anything got in Vietnam. And they'd made the trip dozens of times without incident. That's when the convoy stopped. Not because of enemy contact. Not because of a breakdown. It stopped because something was standing in the middle of the road. The creature was alone this time. The same tall one from the firebase. Thorn was certain of it. Those darker scales, that imposing height. It stood perfectly still in the afternoon sun, seemingly unbothered by the daylight that should have sent it retreating to whatever caves or tunnels it called home. What the heck is that? The driver of the lead vehicle radioed back. Thorn grabbed the radio. Hold position. Nobody fires. That's an order. Sarge. I don't take orders from. You do now. Hold your position. Thorn climbed out of his truck and walked toward the creature. Behind him, he could hear soldiers shouting, confused and frightened. But he kept walking, because somehow he knew this was meant for him. This was personal. He stopped about 10 feet away. The creature's eyes tracked his movement, that same unsettling intelligence behind them. Why? Thorn asked. Why show yourself in daylight? Why risk being seen? The creature was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke. This time its English was better, clearer, like it had been practicing. You ask questions. You seek truth. Others forget. You remember. I can't forget, even if I wanted to. Good. You must remember. Must tell. When time comes. Tell what? That you exist? Nobody believes me. My own government wants me silent. The creature tilted its head. Government knows. Always known. They made choice long ago. Keep secret. Keep peace between your kind and mine. Thorn felt his blood run cold. How long? How long has the government known? Since beginning. Since your kind first came with fire and metal. We retreated. Watched. Waited. Hoped you would leave. But you stay. You build. You destroy. You forget lessons. What lessons? That you are not alone. That this world older than you. That some places, some things must remain untouched. The creature took a step closer. War ends soon. You go home. You live life. But you carry knowledge. You carry truth. One day, many years from now, someone will ask. Someone will need to know. You will tell them. Why me? Because you saw us. Truly saw us. Not as monsters. Not as enemy. As what we are. Living things. Ancient things. Things with right to exist. Thorn swallowed hard. Are there more of you? Beyond Quang Binh. The creature's mouth curled into that unclear expression again. We are everywhere. In jungles, in caves, in deep places. Watching, always watching. Your wars come and go. Your civilizations rise and fall. We remain. We endure. And if humanity keeps pushing, keeps destroying, what happens then? Then we stop watching. We start acting. The weight of those words settled on Thorn like a physical thing. This wasn't just about Vietnam. This was about the entire relationship between humanity and the ancient world we'd forgotten existed. A world we'd paved over and built upon and assumed was ours to dominate. I'll remember, Thorn said. I'll tell the story. When the time comes. Good. Now you must go. They are coming. Who's coming? But the creature was already moving, retreating into the jungle with that impossible silence. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only disturbed plants and the lingering smell of copper and ancient earth. 5 minutes later, 2 helicopters appeared overhead. Military police. They landed on the road and spent 3 hours questioning every man in the convoy. What did you see? What did it say? Did you take photographs? The official report listed it as a possible local wildlife encounter. Species unknown. The men were warned that discussing the incident would result in immediate court-martial. And once again, the truth was buried. Thorn went home in November 1968. He never went back to Vietnam. Never wanted to. He carried the memories, though. Carried them through the rest of his military service, through college, through marriage and kids, and a career as a high school history teacher. He never told anyone. Not his wife, not his children. How could he? How do you explain that the world is stranger than anyone knows? That there are ancient intelligences living in forgotten places, watching humanity with patient, calculating eyes? But he kept records, notes, sketches, the samples he'd taken away. The photographs Hale had taken, also taken away. Everything that might prove the encounter had happened was taken or destroyed. Except his memory. They couldn't take that. In 1989, he got a letter. No return address. Just a single page with 3 words. We still watch. In 2003, another letter. This time it said, the caves grow deeper. Your kind digs too far. In 2015, some have forgotten the agreement. Remind them. Thorn never learned who sent the letters. Never could trace them. But he knew. Somehow they were still keeping track of him. Making sure he remembered. Making sure that when the time came, he'd be ready to tell the truth. He tried reaching out to the other members of that patrol. Hale had died in a car accident in 1975. Vega had disappeared in 1982. Just vanished one day, never found. Price lived in Montana but refused to talk about Vietnam. Reyes was the only one who would speak, and even then only in vague terms. Sometimes I think we imagined it. Reyes told him during a phone call in 2010. Sometimes I think it was stress or fear or some kind of group hallucination. But then I remember how it felt looking into those eyes, hearing that voice. And I know it was real. I know we saw something that nobody was supposed to see. Do you think they're still there? Thorn asked. I think they're everywhere. I think they've always been everywhere. We just don't look in the right places. Or maybe they're very good at not being seen. That was the last time they spoke. Reyes died of a heart attack 6 months later. Now, in 2025, Thorn is 79 years old. He's the last one left from that patrol. The last living witness to what happened in the jungles of Quang Binh in July 1968. And he's finally telling the story. Not because he wants attention or fame or validation, but because that creature told him someone would need to know. Someone would ask. And you're asking. You want to know if monsters are real. If there are things in this world that science hasn't discovered. That governments keep secret. That hide in the forgotten places where humans fear to go. The answer is yes. They're real. They're ancient. They're intelligent. And they're watching us. Always watching. Waiting to see if we'll learn the lessons they've been trying to teach us for thousands of years. That not everything is ours to claim. That not every mystery should be solved. That some boundaries exist for good reason. that the Earth holds secrets older than civilization. And disturbing those secrets comes with consequences. Thorn keeps the letters in a locked box in his study. 23 of them now, spanning almost 60 years. The most recent arrived last week. It said simply, "Tell them before it's too late." Too late for what? He doesn't know. Maybe too late to prevent another encounter. Maybe too late to stop humanity from pushing too far into those sacred places. Maybe too late to avoid a reckoning that's been building for centuries. What he does know is this. Somewhere in the jungles of Vietnam, in the mountains of Quang, Binh, in caves that run deeper than any map shows, they're still there. Still watching. Still waiting. The skinwalkers, the giants, the pale crawlers, whatever you want to call them. Names don't matter. What matters is that they exist. What matters is that we share this world with things far older and stranger than we're comfortable admitting. And what matters most is what happens next. Because the agreement the creature spoke of, that understanding between their kind and ours, it's fraying. Every year, more jungle is cleared. More caves are explored. More of their territory is violated. And they're running out of places to hide. The question isn't whether another encounter will happen. The question is what will happen when it does. Will we listen? Will we learn? Will we finally understand that taking care of the Earth doesn't mean controlling everything on it? Or will we push too far? Will we dig too deep? Will we disturb something that should have remained undisturbed? Thorn doesn't know, but he knows he was chosen to carry this message. Chosen to remember when others forgot. Chosen to tell the story when the time was right. That time is now. So remember this. When you're walking through a forest at night and the sounds suddenly stop. When you smell something copper and ancient on the wind. When you see a light that shouldn't exist moving through the trees. Don't assume you're alone. Don't assume you're safe. Don't assume that humanity is the only intelligence on this planet. Because we're not. We never were. And they're still watching. Always watching.